And thank you all for being here, and we'll get the program started. Thank you.
Thanks, Sky, and it's great to see everybody here this morning. $35 trillion was the figure I was reading yesterday on Cybersecurity Threat Report. That's the figure that's being quoted for 2021 in terms of the cost of cybercrime in the United States, up from $3 trillion in 2015. So I probably don't need to tell any of you that, and many of you are experts in this field, but that's one of the reasons we're here today again, is to discuss how we're going to secure our infrastructure and protect assets in our national security. I'm Janice Walker. I'm the Dean for Workforce Education at Whatcom Community College, and I'm here because Whatcom has a nationally recognized program for cybersecurity education. We're a center of academic excellence, and we're also a national resource center in education for other colleges and to develop their programs. Our curriculum is mapped to National Security Agency standards, and a variety of our students are sitting right here in the audience. So we're really proud of our program, and we appreciate you companies that are taking our students as interns and hiring our graduates. Julian here's going to talk about Western's program as well. We have a 2+2 pathway, a degree program pathway up to Western's cybersecurity degree program, as well as our own 2-year and 4-year degree at Whatcom. But enough about me. I think we're going to move into our panel and let them introduce themselves, and then we have some prepared questions, and we're also going to be open to any questions that you have from the audience. So Julian, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Julian Russia. I hold a faculty appointment with Western Washington University. I teach computer science and cyber security courses, and I also have a research group comprised of students. My research group is federally funded. We basically do research for the United States Air Force, and we are also working with the DOE currently with regards to cyber physical systems.
Hi, my name is Ed ONeill. I'm the interim director of TAG. No, there's no possible way I can actually fill Meg's shoes, so I'm not really trying. I'm only going to be doing this for a couple of months. Prior to that, I was the CEO for emergency reporting here in Bellingham. We had a very interesting cybersecurity practice protecting HIPAA records for millions of Americans across the country and around the world. Prior to that, I had a couple of appointments with Fortune 500 companies, some time as a CISO for a .com. And so my goal today is to bring some business context. I have two great security practitioners with me today, but I know many of you are business leaders, and I've been thinking about this a lot as a business manager and hope to share my thoughts with you today.
Morning, everyone. Mark Goldenberg. I'm with CenturyLink. So I've been working in cybersecurity for about 18 years now. Hard to believe. So I've seen it go through a lot of ups and downs, but it's been always an interesting and dynamic career. So those of you out there, students who are thinking about it, definitely encourage you to pursue it. Over the last couple years, my primary role is working with large-scale customers of CenturyLink, Fortune 500s, to position really the best security solution for their needs. So hopefully today I'll give you a little bit of input on what those type of organizations are thinking about from a cybersecurity perspective and what's top of mind for them.
Are we ready for presentations now first? Yeah, okay. So, Mark, you want to start? Whoever's first. Ed's first.
Hi. So, yeah, they're better at it than I am. We're going to start from business and move into technical. I wanted to come today in part because this last 12 months, from a business leader perspective, has been extremely disturbing. I mean, we've all been watching news and media about all kinds of challenges that are happening in the cybersecurity space, but I think from a business management perspective, this is especially of concern for folks like you. And I want to start off with just my general perspective as a business manager, business leader, running businesses, that when I think of security, I really think of trust. For example, many of you in the financial markets, you feel like your finances are safe because you trust your banker. Your finances are secure. And so as I was contemplating the trends that were happening, I started thinking about this in relationship to my data. How do I trust that my data is secure? And in large measure, that has to do with who you trust with your data. So up here, I got a question for the group. Would you trust this guy? You know, he kind of looks like a banker, got suit and tie on, and seems like he might be pretty trustworthy. You know, so how do you get a reputation? It's more than just looks, because looks can be deceiving. Well, this gentleman is actually the former CEO of Equifax. And he's actually someone we all trusted with our data, our personal data, our financial data, whether we liked it or not. He was the guy who held the keys to all of our most sensitive information. And you know, this kind of sparked off an interesting trend, which was when this event went down, which I would classify as the most significant data breach in the history of data. I mean, the history of computers, the history of information. This was the big one. And in the prior 18 years, in Mark's history, usually what happened when you had a data breach was you found a root cause, which usually was in your IT. Somebody was culpable for not doing your job. You might have made a scapegoat of that person, and it kind of died down from there, and that was the end of it. Well, this new era, there's no place to hide from the impact of information security problems. It goes all the way up to the top. And so what you're seeing is not just this guy being the first one who was fired. There also were a bunch of IT people that eventually fell as well. But he took the heat square on his head. And as recently as this past week, you're seeing in the media with the Facebook situation. When they're worried about data privacy, data protection, and the use of data, the guy who's being held accountable is the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. They're dragging him all over the world to account for how this data was used inappropriately. So that's a trend that I think we all need to embrace, that if you haven't accepted for your business that there is no delegation for information security and the confidentiality of your customers' data, it's going to go all the way to the top and potentially affect everyone in between. And that was pretty disturbing for me. It's a quick way to not be a CEO if you don't get this right. So the other trend that I wanted to comment about was just the changes in impact. You know, it used to be that a data breach or a cybersecurity problem would have consequences in finance or reputation, but they weren't massively impactful. But you look at a couple of these numbers here, you know, now you're measuring this in billions of dollars, and in the Facebook case, nearly $100 billion based on one event of, you know, semi-questionable misuse. It may actually have been a permitted use. So thinking about risk and risk management, for me as a CEO, the other thing that I had to deal with was thinking about, well, these are real threats to business survival. I could have a fire or a software problem or, you know, many other types of risks that really didn't affect the very survival of the business. But looking at this and looking at, again, you know, 100 million HIPAA-controlled records, the loss of that information literally would have put us out of business in emergency reporting. So that's another thing to embrace, is that the impact of data and cybersecurity is now perhaps way higher than many other threats that you might have traditionally classified as your top concerns. My last one, I'm going to give a quick moment to take a look at this slide. It's been out there for a while, so give you a chance to refresh your memory if you haven't seen it. So there's also this trend that's emerged here recently, which is no one is safe. You know, this was several years ago. Robert Mueller hasn't been director of FBI for a number of years, so this is, I think, 8 years old now. Even back then, he said, really, you're likely to be hacked, and you're likely to be hacked again. And that's absolutely true. I got to attend a recent national security event where one of the speakers was a former NSA red team hacker, an offensive hacker. And he made a very bold statement, which sunk in with me, which is, he said, you know, when I worked for the NSA, we were assigned a lot of very difficult, hard targets. And in my 12 years with the NSA, we never failed to compromise a target. And in their vernacular, the assignment actually was not just to compromise them, but to ensure that there were multiple vectors that can be used, because sometimes you get caught with your hand in the honey pot and you need to come up with another plan to get the cookies out. So that literally meant we always found at least 2 ways to get into any target we're ever presented with. So for a determined adversary, there may not actually be a practical defense. And I hope that the research folks in the group will have some good answers for that that'll help us in the future. But this has really grown to the point where you can't ignore this because the threats are always real and prevalent. And so in a business risk assessment perspective, figuring out how you manage this, that a determined attacker is always going to get in, what do you do as mitigation for that? And there are some good strategies, and we're going to talk about a few of those on the panel. And that is my sections.
All right, my input is of a scientific nature. I'm not a businessman, not yet, in the sense that I'm trying to commercialize my research as a faculty member and build a startup. And I'm in the process of doing that, but I'm here primarily to provide input from a researcher's perspective. We do deal with malware almost on a daily basis. We see aggressive, intelligent, scientific malware, and hence I think I am in the position to talk about what we feel are some areas of science that have potential to improve defense. This is based on our research for the Air Force, as I mentioned at the beginning. Obviously, I'm not going to get into technical details, but I wanted to say that we are much more concerned with a tracking of adversaries, and hence one of the objectives in our work is to basically be able to not only detect adversaries but also interact with them and develop capabilities that allow us to sustain continuous interaction with them, so that we can watch them, so that we can study them, so that we can do attack attribution. Like the other speakers mentioned, attacks happen on a regular basis, and they are likely to continue. So it's only a matter of time before computers get compromised. And hence, the idea here is that we also spend some efforts on attack attribution, so that we can basically hold the attackers accountable. So the areas that I feel have potential here include kernel development. The operating system is the heart or the foundation of a machine, of a computer machine. The kernel is where the operating system code is, and we have found that it's quite advantageous to the defenders to operate in there, with regards to detection, with regards to response, with regards to mathematically controlling attacker behavior, because that's what we do. We take actions in order to basically force the attackers to take actions that are advantageous to us defenders. A lot of security products, you may be aware of this, operate at the kernel level. So my input is that yes, it's a wonderful land to be. Obviously, once malware lands in there, it becomes a battleground. So there is malware and there is you with direct contact with each other, and hence we feel that the area of steganography, which is the art of secret communication. This is not about protecting communications. This is about protecting the existence of the communication. We feel that that has a lot of potential to allow your code, your modules in whatever security product you may be investigating to communicate with each other, with the attackers being in the middle. Another area that we feel has potential includes artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence basically gives you a artificial mind that you can put in the operating system's kernel to automate a lot of tasks. We do sensing, we do decision making under uncertainty, we do calibrated control. So basically we answer questions like, you are taking this action, how can you anticipate the effect of that action on your interactions with the attacker? We find that artificial intelligence is quite powerful with regards to trapping attackers in a way that allows for, like I said, investigating them. Other areas that we have found, because of course it's not just me, it's also my student team, to have lots of potential are big data analytics. We, in fact, investigate deception-guided big data analytics, which means that we deploy traps and then we somehow inject a decoy stream into the overall computations of malware so that to affect them. And then based on that effect, we, like I said, we make the adversaries take certain actions that we are able to detect in large patterns. So what we deal with here is detect small variations of large patterns. Some other final notes here are about the relationship between data analytics and deception. We find that very useful in the sense that when we do data analytics to understand the operation of a machine, and that basically sometimes is specific to the mission of the machine. There are business machines, there are, in our case, we have cyber-physical systems, so these are basically systems that monitor and control the power grid, the electrical substations, the transmission, and so on. By doing machine learning, we are able to inform better deception algorithms. We also are able to basically provide for consistency, because one thing that attackers do when they land onto high-value targets is to basically probe their targets for consistency anomalies, and that's how they can detect a honeypot or other traps of various kinds. Again, if you are thinking to research a product to build a business, or if you're thinking to basically buy a product that you feel could protect your company, these are the areas that we basically feel have potential to do well. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So just to kind of add on a few things in my perspective on what's going on in the cybersecurity landscape today. When I go talk to customers, and again, my background, we're talking to mostly Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 customers, but the one key thing is that the issues that they have to deal with every day are very similar to the issues that you have to deal with every day. All right, just because they're a larger organization doesn't mean the issues they have to deal with change. Now, they may become more mature, they may have more resources at their disposal, but the basic underlying cybersecurity issues remain the same. You know, I used to say not, a month goes by when we don't hear about a major breach. Now, it's almost a day doesn't go by when we don't hear about a recent breach. David mentioned the City of Atlanta issue that's happening right now. Who's seen that in the news? Who's familiar with that? Right? So those of you familiar with it, and honestly, I'll tell you, I saw it come across kind of my news feed the other day. I didn't even pay attention to it, just because if I looked into each breach that came across, that's all I'd be doing every day. So I did look at it last night a little bit, and so I did want to highlight this one, just because it's in the news, and also it highlights a couple of key things that you can take away today and bring back to your business. So the city of Atlanta, they have ransomware on their systems. So ransomware, what is ransomware? It's a form of malware, right? You hear all these terms, ransomware, malware, crypto locker, low key, right? These are all forms of ransomware. So they have ransomware infected on their systems, which locked up critical file systems that the city uses every day. These are critical for the city's operation. Now, how did this happen? Right? We don't know specifically, they haven't come out and said, but a couple of pretty good guesses. Somebody within the city with access to these files clicked on a phishing email. Okay? We've all seen these phishing emails. Some are well crafted, some are obvious. But to what you were saying, Julian, earlier about persistent, right? Why can the NSA guy make sure that he infiltrates the system? Well, maybe the first phishing email you don't click on. Maybe the second one you don't click on. But the third and fourth attempt, it's targeted. That's known as spear phishing. Then that person clicks on it. Might go out. Yeah. Oh yeah, I hear it. I thought that was by design. Just for me. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, okay, it's back. There you go. There you go. Right? So everybody's susceptible to phishing schemes. You know, I'm not gonna say that I'm not susceptible. A good phishing scheme can get anybody. Okay? But it's the basics, and that's kind of what I'll be talking about a little bit today, is understand the basics and cover your basics, and then that'll cover you against most attacks. This right here, you guys can't see it. You don't have to see it, but this is the cybersecurity landscape today. This is what large-scale IT security teams are having to deal with every day. They're having to navigate this landscape. These are all technologies, providers, different services to help secure their business. So they have to make sense of all this. Hundreds and hundreds of companies, thousands of different technologies. Which one best fits their organization? They have to make sense of it. Who remembers this? Homeland Security Advisory System, right? After 9/11, this was put out. What happened a couple years after this was put out? I travel a lot. I go to airports all the time. It was in the elevated and high status for years. What did we end up doing as travelers? Ignoring it, right? Ignoring it. This was replaced in 2011 by a new standard, which, you know, how much visibility do we have to that now? And what this ended up happening, and this is very much the same from a security perspective in what security teams have to deal with, is it's just information. It's information without intelligence. So it just creates noise. So why have the information come through if you're not going to make it actionable? And that's the challenge with cybersecurity these days, is it's not a shortage of information. You can get all the great tools from all those different vendors, but unless you're going to be able to make them relevant for your environment, then it's not going to be applicable. There's one takeaway from my talk today with you guys. Keep in mind that 99% of successful attacks now and in the future, Gartner says through 2020, are going to be taking advantage of known vulnerabilities. Right? That means patch your systems. Keep an eye on your perimeter security. Do the basics, and then that'll be able to stop 99% of potentially successful attacks out there. Now, not to say that that's going to be the end all, that should be the baseline. Because security's hard. It's finding that needle in the haystack, and that's the 1%. That's the targeted attacks, right, that are going to come after you next. But it's much more than just the needle in the haystack right now. It looks more like this for a lot of organizations, finding that needle in the needle stack. Okay? And that's where some of the more advanced tools come into play. But the idea is understand where you're at from a security maturity perspective. You may not be highly mature. You may not be looking for the needle in the needle stack today. That may be for years down the road. But right now, understand where you're at, do the basics, don't be overwhelmed. This last slide, and I know you can't see it, this is a security maturity curve. The other thing I'd like you to take away today is understand where you're at from an organization perspective. How's your maturity within your organization? Are you down here towards the lower tail on the left, where maybe you're struggling just to put in a firewall? Or maybe you're more towards the middle, where you have log collection issues, SIM integration issues, malware technology deployment issues that you have. The point is that no matter where you're at on this curve, you can always progress to the right. And that should be the objective and takeaway. All right, thank you.
Okay, we're going to go into some Q&A now. As I said, I have a couple prepared questions, but I'd like to ask if anyone in the audience would like to pose a couple questions.
Looks like I'll travel. I'm Tim with Cree Technology up in Linden. The only question I have for anybody is, have you guys noticed with the research or in practicality any trends that the attacks are coming in at any day or time? Holiday weekends, evenings, anything like that? Or they just come midday and people just don't notice it?
I want to say that at first there were some time patterns in attacks. Those are changing in the sense that what I'm referring to is basically attacks originating from certain IPs at during certain office hours at certain location. So that basically is evolving into irregularities, and that is basically because of automated exploits. So basically, instead of a human launching an exploit directly, there will be a script or a program that basically times the launch of the attack.
So a lot of the companies that I work with are global in nature, so it's really spread across. There's no specific, one area to look at, and that's why the ability to have some monitoring 24/7 is really important. A lot of organizations right now, they'll have 8x5 visibility to threats within their network, but there's no shortage of attacks that come in on the weekends, on holidays, right? The hackers are going to work Christmas Eve, so having full visibility across the spectrum, it's important, and it goes to that needle in the haystack analogy, in that, hey, if you miss one, it could be off hours on a Sunday morning, that's going to be the one that could ultimately impact your business.
I would say from a business defense perspective, a lot of the stuff is automated. A lot of the folks are pretty stealthy, so they want to be secretive. They kind of keep it at a low level. So it's pretty common to see a sort of slow background hum of things kind of knocking on your door throughout the day, throughout the night, throughout the weekend, throughout everything. But the other trend that's happening is that the folks out there are they're really getting smart. So when you think about social engineering attacks, if I get a phishing email at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be much more visible to me that that's not really from my HR department, that that's from some outside location. But if they send it at 9 in the morning or coinciding with a published company event, these guys know what's going on within your business. They're reading your website, they're reading your press releases, and they're exploiting all of that information to time their attacks. So that's a great question, Meg, because I think that's a panel question. So all of us actually have a few little answers for that. I guess I'll start. echoing on comments from Mark here, the reality is a lot of these are known attacks, and so it sounds like going back to basics here, but I think all of us are going to reiterate that the threats that are most prevalent for most businesses are the basic things you've been hearing about for years, and it's going to sound repetitive for us to say them again, but we're going to say them again. Patch your systems, take consistent backups, secure your human, educate your people about the risks of phishing attacks and things they can do to potentially respond. And also, I guess the last bit of advice I'd offer is get a good partner. You know, someone who can help ensure that you've covered the basics and then guide you into the more advanced things beyond that. It's not any different than the approach you take with your finances. You probably have an internal finance person, but there's some complexities at the fringes when you get to tax time or whatever, where you need a specialist. And I think that kind of partnership for most businesses, unless you're truly Fortune 500 size and can afford it, well, shoot, even them, they often have specialists and extra resources as well, CenturyLink and others, that come in and provide that specialized expertise. So I guess we all need that. I'll pass it around because I know everyone wants time on that.
So we talked about a couple of data breaches, right? Equifax, of course, the city of Atlanta. So let's look at those a little bit more in detail. Equifax was breached because they did not patch a system. It was a known vulnerability for months. They did not patch their system. Equifax, you can imagine their security resources and their security maturity is extremely high. They took their eye off the ball on the basics. Okay. City of Atlanta, why didn't they have a backup? Why? Right? So somebody's going to click on the phishing email. You get malware on your system. It encrypts your files. Okay, that happens. That could happen to anybody in this room, CenturyLink included. You should anticipate that, have a backup. So say, okay, if that happens, wipe the system, restore it from the clean backup. That's basics IT security 101. Right? So again, I go back to don't get caught up with all the high maturity, very elevated technology. That stuff's important, but make sure you have the basics first.
I'll add to that just a little bit. I want to say that some communication is supposed to be open by definition. If we take into account the recent attacks against the energy infrastructure, where basically the attackers sent resumes to human resources recruiting talent. So that by definition needs to come from people you probably don't know. And hence an email from someone you've never met is not a strange pattern, because you get candidates from all over the content, and hence it's normal. What is not okay is to basically open up attachments on computers that are not isolated, computers that are not configured well. It's always best to basically accept openness in communication, but then when you have no guarantee that the other party is going to be genuine with you, then it's always good to use isolation. And what I have in mind right now is virtual machines. Why not open up attachments on a virtual machine that has no physical connection to any other network?
Questions? Okay, sure.
You spoke a lot about reuse. I spoke a lot about partnering with a specialist and they not having to but I know that for some businesses, it's hard to navigate that landscape, knowing whether or not you have an IT company that may be working for you, or these kind of businesses before that kind of looking at these equipment, like you said, but it wasn't deployed properly, it wasn't being used correctly. What are some questions I guess you would advise a business to ask an IT service provider, managed service provider, before going to that kind of contact? What are the top few questions?
Yeah, vetting a cybersecurity firm or group is probably not unlike vetting any other professional service that you might use. Probably the most important attribute these days is really reputation. What are your peers saying? Did you get a chance to meet them at a nice forum like this because they're a fine, upstanding member of the Whatcom Chamber? But the other things that are really important is also looking at credentialing. There are a whole bunch of different certifying bodies that provide credentials for individual professionals. Obviously, there's degree programs from our local institutions that do a great job of assessing a reputation. So it's a combination of the firm's credentials, the individual's credentials, and the way you sort of stack up that background in their reputation of the tasks that they've completed.
So a lot of organizations, when they're working with a service provider, come to us and maybe say, okay, they have the mentality to say, it's off our plate now from a cybersecurity perspective. You know, that's really not the right answer. You know, we talked about responsibility going all the way up to the C-level. Even if you have another provider you're working with, your organization still maintains that responsibility if you are breached. I'd say one of the most important things in working with a consultant, a service provider, is still take ownership of your cybersecurity. Your provider will be able to help you and guide you, but at the end of the day, you still have to have your team take ownership of the information they provide back to you.
Question in the back? Recognize a phishing email.
Yeah, so we tackled this one pretty directly at emergency reporting. You know, I'm in addition to CEO, I was taking security very seriously, so I was working on my training and my credentialing as well, and tried to maintain a heightened awareness in response to the fact that the CEO can't avoid this. So I took a personal initiative at emergency reporting, and I said, well, look, let's just assess our phishing readiness. And so we conducted some internal campaigns where we had fake phishing email. And this is very common in large enterprises. They do this all the time in their InfoSec groups. You know, smaller groups may not have the resources to do it. Maybe use an outside provider to help you with that. But practice it. And boy, we had a rude awakening with this one. So fortunately, I had a team of folks that was very well trained at our local institutions. They did a great job of faking it. The phishing was beautiful. It was almost indistinguishable from our corporate site, and they crafted a message that looked like it came from our help desk manager. You know, please click here to update your information on XYZ. And it looked like an Office 365 login page, and everything was just really well done. We had almost a 40% hit rate on that. Yeah, it was bad. So. You know, I kind of knew that was lurking in the background, and it was just one of those things where I had my head in the sand and hadn't really accepted the risk, and so, you know, I guess good for me that I decided to test it. But it opened up the doors for a lot of awareness. One, everyone understood, wow, this is a real thing, and you know, we need to be much more diligent about it. It gave more latitude to our HR department to conduct security awareness training associated with phishing and phishing risks. And then, you know, we even got serious about some basic things. Like, for example, most modern email systems have the ability to clearly distinguish whether a message is coming from an internal source or an external source. And so this particular vulnerability actually came from outside the organization, but looked like it came from inside. And so it's a pretty easy thing for an IT provider or your IT department to do, to go label your messages so you can clearly see, is this coming from someone who's part of my organization? And that same message, when we tried it again later, you know, with a little bit different slant, had almost a 0 hit rate. Now, we also learned something else, which is if you're traveling and you're trying to read your mail on the phone, you're much less likely to be as diligent about the security of the message. So there's another vote to the timing of these folks. If they know you're traveling, you post your travel plans on your Facebook page, boy, that's a great way to set you up for a phishing campaign, spear phishing campaign, travel alert from your airline. You catch it on your phone, you're probably not going to look at it because it feels very relevant and something you're probably expecting. Those are really hard to defend against.
I wanted to add a very brief input. I wanted to say that sometimes the management can take measures to help employees spot inconsistencies by making them aware of business dynamics offline. I can give you an example. For example, if our university there says that, we will never ask you as an employee of this university to update your credentials. What happens is that when you log on, eventually you'll get a notice when the expiration time is approaching. But it will never happen that we contact you saying, okay, here's a request for you to update your password, your credentials. And hence, with that dynamic in mind, communicated in alternative ways, whenever there is some email saying, hey, we had some system maintenance issues that we were able to solve overnight, please update your credentials, then you know on the spot that that is basically inconsistent because of what management told you offline.
So the question is, how do you feel about free services and what should you be watching for?
So at the end of the day, it's your data, right, that you're sharing. So you have to be diligent. How many people just click through user acceptance policies for whatever app you're downloading, what have you? Okay. So in the Facebook example, the user acceptance agreement initially had that displayed, right? It was, what was it? It was a personality test that was developed out of a university. There was an app, and it went to users, and I think it offered to pay them a certain amount, maybe $1 or $2, to go ahead and complete this personality profile. They did so, right, gladly. They're sharing their information, but what they didn't understand is that via the user agreement, it also, when they clicked accept, it also allowed Facebook then to share all their information for all their friends. Okay, so there's details in there. We're never going to read all that, right? We're never going to read all that. But when you're using all that information, ask yourself the worst case scenario, right? What if the information that I'm inputting or have within Facebook, or it could be a financial institution, what if it does get out? What if it does get compromised? What's my fallback plan? Right? And try to ask yourself those questions as you share your information.
So I'll jump in on this one. I think the society view of what is private or secret is really changing. And it used to be we had an assumption that most stuff that was yours, you managed and you controlled, where I think today, if you've taken a digital record, you should probably assume that that could be known to the world. I mean, I already shared that everything is potentially breachable, and most security professionals feel that you can't truly lock it down in a way that will totally keep it safe. So I think, for me personally, I've adopted, listen to my grandmother, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. So if you're saying it online, it's probably going to get widely disseminated and widely known. Assume that just about all your digital records and your internet activities are in some way, if not fully public, are attainable or compromisable. And that allows you to sort of change your mentality to focus on those few things that are really important. And what are they, and how am I going to treat those differently? I'm certainly not going to put them on Facebook. What level of protection is appropriate for those particular items? And in the business world, one of our providers here, 3D Corp, they offer some security assessment services. Actually, that's one of my recommendations for the groups here is if you haven't done a security assessment in your business, you probably should think about doing that. It's a fairly low-cost way to just increase your awareness of what's going on and what's important in your organization. And it might surprise you. So for example, we went through this drill at emergency reporting, and one of the things that I discovered was we were spending a great percentage of our effort securing things that related to business operations. HR data, salary data, financial data. And all those things are generally confidential. You know, I wouldn't like tack them up on a wall. But, you know, like, let me just pick on an easy one here. So salary data, there's so many public salary sources. You could probably give me your job title, and with 5 minutes of work on the internet, I could probably peg your salary plus or minus $10,000 with a pretty high degree of accuracy. Yet all of us consider our payroll and salary data like one of the most sacrosanct things in the corporation when it's really not that secret. And we looked at the amount of work and effort we were putting into that, and as we were prioritizing the information assets we had, that one got a huge high rating, and some of the things that related to customer data didn't really get the same level of care. And when we really inspected that with some consultation from a good provider, we realized, well, look, we've only got so many resources to apply. Are these really balanced in the right way? If I were to lose my customers' data, I would be out of business. Do that first, and then all this other stuff you can get to whenever. If I were to lose salary data, it would be unpleasant and uncomfortable, but the business would absolutely survive. I might have to, you know, I would have had to give a couple of raises maybe a couple of rotational attrition, but it was certainly a recoverable event where those few truly key assets, man, those are your bread and butter. You need to focus your energy there.
Another question, go ahead.
What about cyber insurance? What lessons did you look at? I made sure that our policy had different audience. I was thinking strictly with the network, but I'm very concerned with what happens if the information is secure. Get out there, how much insurance should I have to cover my flood when I have to fix it so I can
And maybe you could speak a little to incident response. So what do you do in addition to insurance when you've been hacked? What are the top few things?
I mean, cyber insurance from an organization perspective, it's becoming more and more prevalent. The larger organizations are budgeting for it, getting it by default. The underwriters, however, are struggling a little bit right now because what constitutes an actual breach for a payout, there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of uncertainty in the industry, but it's evolving. Okay, so it'll evolve, get more mature over time. There'll be more clarifications. The Facebook one is a good example. Is that a data breach? Kind of, not really. Would Facebook be able to claim an insurance claim for something like that? No way. You know, so there's a lot of that kind of gray area from cyber insurance, but I'll tell you that most, if not all, of Fortune 1000s absolutely have it. It's becoming mandatory, a mandatory budget item. Incidentally, kind of a tangent, but also since we're talking about the Atlanta breach, some organizations now are actually budgeting to pay ransoms for cyber attacks, which is kind of crazy, but they're actually budgeting for it.
So I love this question too, because it's one that I struggle with a lot. Guy, if you want to think about a chamber event talking about cyber insurance, I personally would love to get more education about that myself. When I was also buying cyber insurance, I found it really complicated, to truly assess what is your risk profile and how much do you need, and how do you know that your insurance partner will be performant in the event of a breach. And the thing that's happening today is that most insurance tends to not pay if there's some attribute of negligence. And so, kind of look at the Equifax example. Well, if you didn't patch your server you were not exercising due care in protecting that asset. And that usually tends to be a reason for exclusion. So what you're seeing is lots of folks with cyber insurance that aren't actually getting paid in the event of a breach because there's all kinds of loopholes. And that's just a terrible situation for a business owner, business leader to be in, because you're looking for a way to manage the risk and shift some of that risk, yet if you can't do it comfortably and effectively, it really doesn't bring the value that it's supposed to. So I would just be extremely diligent, continue to learn, and if you have good information or insight onto that, please share it with the rest of us, because that's a very tough topic.
Go ahead. So how effective is chip and pin? Am I saying that correctly? Yeah.
I'll take a shot. It's not really my area of expertise. Just from what I've seen, as a European standard, right, what you're talking about versus just swiping. It was recently brought to the US, right? I think, yeah. So it's a balance, of course, between the merchants and the credit card providers to say, okay, this is what we have to pay out because of breaches versus convenience for the consumer. The US has traditionally been kind of probably 5 to 10 years behind in adopting, right? So it's been kind of an uphill battle, but it's been that balance between convenience from the merchants, from the users, and being willing to adopt that technology, right? David, we were at Starbucks today, and what did you have to do? Yep, right? Oh, give me the reader, put in your PIN. That slows down the transactions. Right, so that's why the merchants have been a little bit reluctant. I would say from an effectiveness standpoint, 100%, absolutely. And not only that, but take that approach to how you authenticate into your bank when you log in. Are you using a two-factor authentication mechanism? Because that's what it is, right? It's something you know, which is your password, and something that changes, which is your the two-factor mechanism. So taking that kind of methodology and applying it to critical sites that you log into as a consumer, your banking site. How many people are using two-factor authentication to their banking site, right? So I'd encourage you absolutely to do that. I think that's definitely where we're headed from, securing your most critical assets.
I'll jump in on that one. I think the Europeans got it right out of the gate. I was really disappointed when chip cards came to the U.S. and they didn't come with pins. That seemed like a not very effective way, and I actually got to demonstrate that here recently. So I had some credit cards replaced from some lost cards. Actually in January of this year, they were stolen out of my mailbox, successfully activated, so they must have been able to get enough information about me to activate them, and they used them at a bunch of local merchants here. My friends at the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office are on the case and hopefully chasing this down, but even with a chipped card, it was tremendously easy, apparently, for someone to commit fraud, and I ultimately was not liable, but there were thousands of dollars of charges that got eaten, and this happens every day, thousands of times a day. I can't cite the numbers, but the European instance of credit card fraud is a small fraction of what it is in the U.S., and it's been demonstrated as a successful way to combat fraud. So I'm glad that we're finally getting with the program here. I think that's a great step in the right direction.
I just wanted to add that there are limitations to strong authentication, although we do advise it to use as much as possible. In the case study in question, there are situations in which you have to let go of your card. Let's say you are at the restaurant, you're about to pay the check, and the waiter basically takes away your card. So that segment of time, I can give you technical details if you like, would suffice to basically clone the chip. And hence, it's important that we basically manage our perception. A debit card with a chip is going to provide some extra layers of protection, but there are certain limitations that we need to basically convince ourselves that exist, and hence be cautious in terms of what we expect. I'll take this one. So this is very, again, it's along the line of strong authentication. We prefer it over passwords. But there is a comment there to make. In case of compromise, you lose a password, you can always change it. But if you basically lose a fingerprint or a retina scan, that is basically gone forever. And there is no way to recover that kind of loss. So typically we use those in high secrecy environments. I wouldn't use, personally, I wouldn't use my fingerprints on ordinary logon applications, including smartphones or computers. But again, that's just a personal opinion.
So Mark, what are some of those steps companies should take for incident response? They've been hacked. What are the first things they should pay attention to?
So if we look at kind of common threads whenever there is a breach, most likely what it falls down to is a failure in policy, a failure in procedure. So let's say somebody in your organization clicks on that phishing email. Well, you just went through security training, right? You just did the internal test and they passed. How could that have happened? It's not a fault of the user. Okay? We have a tendency to do that. So I would say make sure that you have a policy that anticipates data breach. So these days, saying, I don't know how that could happen, right, because we did our training, that's not an excuse anymore. So it's important when it comes to incident response procedures, anticipate that you will be breached, anticipate that your users will click on that phishing email, you will have compromised data. Now what's your response? Right, I like to put the analogy to say, you know, we put the Equifax CEO in your presentation. Put yourself in his shoes, right? What if you're being interviewed by the local news station, the Wall Street Journal? What's going to be your response? How are you going to respond to the community if your organization's hit with a data breach? And that's where that predefined policy on incident response comes into play. So you could say, okay, we anticipated this, we did our due diligence, and here's our plan. If you do that, then most everybody's going to be forgiving. They're going to be take the mentality to say, yeah, that could have been me, and I see that you've done your due diligence and you're following through with a plan of action. So now's the time to do that, whether it's red teaming exercises or making sure that you just meet with your IT and security team, your business owners, all the way up to the executives within your organization to make sure they have buy-in on that plan. So when the incident does hit, it's not a big surprise and it's not a panic situation.
So I'll weigh in on this that, again, for ultra large enterprises, Fortune 500, security incident event management is a really complex activity. Data science, mining, a lot of pressure, a lot of sense of urgency. You wind up with teams that are trained and practice, and they're emergency responders in that circumstance. For many people, as I would assume in this room, you probably don't have the resources and capabilities to do that. And even coming from my recent perspective at emergency reporting, I was concerned about our ability to do that. And I think the emerging best practice is there are firms that specialize in this, and they take retainers and they help you with the cleanup when it happens. So that may also be another business step for you, depending upon your risk profile, that investing in a team that can do this for you is probably not practical, but having, just like you've got a doctor who responds when you're sick, this is another type of response situation where you can have qualified professionals that can come in and do that hard work, do the data inspection. Also don't want to downplay the fact that the communication work on this is awful. I mean, the PR nightmare that Facebook is facing and having to craft and respond and coordinate that message across thousands of employees, it's just really tough. So don't underestimate the work that you've got there. Find a good partner and try and protect yourself, because it's really hard to do yourself.
So we have time for maybe one or two more comments and questions. One of them is, so where are we headed? Where is cybersecurity threat headed? And Julian, maybe you could speak to that from how you're preparing your students at Western for work in industry now.
The threat actors are evolving in the sense that the parties launching them are, in some cases, educated. They have computer science, engineering, mathematics education. Some of them may very well be scientists. So a lot of malware, especially those that target cyber physical systems or highly specialized environments like high performance computing, where you have large mathematical models that tackle critical problems of science. The people behind are quite knowledgeable, and hence there is an increase in sophistication, I think, that will keep going up, because obviously the more computers are used to hurt each other, the more knowledge, the more talent will be invested in there.
So I'm going to also echo that this is just getting worse, and it's going to continue to get worse for a good while before it gets better. The economics are in the favor of the attackers. There's a great monetary incentive for people to conduct bad behavior, and they can do it in cyberspace with from tens of thousands of miles away. And that's very different than someone trying to break into your physical location, where they have to be in your world and active and present. And also the threats are getting really, really sophisticated. Like I had a stint at a company called Rockwell Collins. They're an aerospace manufacturer. They also, among other products in the aviation guidance arena, also make missile guidance systems, which is a secret that we tried really hard to protect. And I spent a lot of time with the InfoSec folks at that organization, and talking about unusual threats. And one of the ones they shared with me that resonated a lot was nation states would attempt to compromise U.S. military defense contractors by investing in companies that would potentially be acquired. So one of their top threats was, look, in our M&A plan at the board level, they were constantly assessing the risk of XYZ company that has a cool new fangled glass for cockpit avionics systems. How do we know that they're not infiltrated by bad actors from other nation states? And these are things that are much beyond just the science and the technology of what's happening in advanced firewalls and advanced persistent threat defense. So, as I start to wrap my mind around what that really means and how do you enact an effective defense, they were very adverse to acquisitions, and usually they took years, because what they had to do was wind up revetting every employee that was there, and they only got indoctrinated into the corporate systems on a very, very, very gradual basis. And boy, that's terrible for business. It slowed everything down and was sort of anti-progress. But when you have threat landscapes that are that sophisticated, you really want to stick your head in the sand, because it's just tough.
So absolutely, right? One stat that I saw last year, there were about 300 brand new security startups trying to solve this problem enter the industry just last year. 300. Okay, so that's both comforting, right? And it's a little scary. Comforting is because you have a team of researchers, right? Julian's team, new startups, existing mature security organizations that are there trying to solve this problem. Obviously, it's not solved. Adversaries shift their tactics. The community tries to shift to go ahead and counter. So it's an evolution. From an end user, consumer side, we mentioned this earlier, assume your data's out there. Okay? Credit freeze. Who's done credit freezes after Equifax? Right? Yeah. So look into credit freeze. That'll assume that your data is out there. Your social security number is out there. Somebody has it. That's a way to protect yourself. And from a business standpoint, do your backups, encrypt your data, research the right tools that best fit your organization. No matter where you're at, though, have that as a starting point and have the objective to get better.
I think you can hear the emphasis is on continuous education. I mean, everybody at this table is constantly monitoring what's going on and learning, and that's certainly something we try to instill in our students, is that this is, your education is never done. And so we encourage you to think about, sending your employees back to get some additional training at our institutions, and to obviously train themselves constantly. I'm sure that happens a lot for all of you. I want to thank you and thank our panelists, and hand the mic back over to Guy.
Yeah, you don't need to wait for me. Round of applause for, I would say, the amazing panel, and of course Janice. We're so lucky in our community to have all the institutions of higher education, in particular Western and Whatcom, both doing great work in cybersecurity and other tech needs. So thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work in your community. Ed, we value our partnerships with other nonprofits like TAG, and thank you so much for your work and dedication, and I guess prior work as a board member. Janice, you're also a board member. Meg as former exec, and a current board member. They're all around me, all of you. And of course, these events would not be possible without our sponsors. Big round of applause for BP. Of course, Pam had to leave the room as our presenting sponsor. We also have CenturyLink as a great partner for this event, as well as many of our events. And thank you for bringing a specialist in. It's rare that we have the opportunity to bring someone at such a high corporate level, not from this community, and so it's always valuable to have expertise from such a high level outside of this community. So thank you, Mark, for being here. Salish Wealth Management, Cascade Radio Group, 3D, Michael, the pins were great, because I think Rotary took about half as they were walking out, so watched everybody. So if you want a pen, you might have to beeline for the door. So just to kind of keep our commitment to 9 o'clock, Kristen, I hit all the sponsors. Perfect. Last shout out, if you're watching us online, we want to thank Josh, Veritas Media Productions, for providing that opportunity for us. So one last round of applause for our panel and moderator. So last note, we're engaging in the speaker series, as well as our brand new program for 2018 called our On Topic series. You can search all of that information at bellingham.com for all those events. So thank you for being here, and it's right about 9 o'clock.